Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, Armin, for bridging the gap from, let's say, the idea of progress and the critic of progress, the Bauhaus, to something we call Datatopia. And what I want to show you is one of my favorite books. You see the cover here. It's the cover of Charles Jenk's book, Architecture 2000, Predictions and Methods, published in 1970. In it, Jenks tries to classify the many different movements in the architecture of the second half of the last century. The timing of the book's publication was quite smart. A lot of things Jenks did were quite smart. The time it was an in-between time between the end of the experimental 60s and shortly before Robert Venturi's manifesto Learning from Las Vegas in '72 was published and marked the dawn of postmodernism. And as we know, it was Jenks who later drew more attention to this with his Language of Postmodernism Architecture, published in '77. So this was an interesting time of transition, but that's not the point. What I want to show you is one of my favorite pictures of that book. It's actually a collage, and what can we see in it? It's an image divided into three parts, like a pyramid, showing maybe Datatopia as we know it today. Front and left is it a woman sitting at a typewriter or a kind of terminal, and the background is the IBM System 360, which at that time, during the 70s, was the state-of-the-art data storage machine. At the core of this system was a series of magnetic tape streamers in the background. So she's probably a kind of a computer room. A black hand-drawn strip with words along leads from the woman's chair to a second picture. This shows a military control room where serious men are working at terminals, likely conducting radar surveillance. The text connecting the three pictures reads, "All the products of a society are cross-indexed, stored on microfilm with computer access." Amazing. The black strip ends at the third picture higher up, which essentially forms the tip of the pyramid. It's an aerial photograph of the Pentagon in Virginia, the US Department of Defense headquarters, designed by George Bergstrom in '43. Superimposed on the image of the Pentagon are the words CIA, FBI, Pentagon, etc., switch to handling relevant information. It's just great. This part of the collage alone gives us plenty of food for thought and discussion, I think. It depicts a complex web of technology and society, a kind of techno-socio-political web of unprecedented topicality. And now for the right side of the collage, in the foreground, there's a man in a suit, and he seems to be tapping on a small monitor with a so-called light pen, developed by Ivan Sutherland, among others. We should consider that this coupling of man and machine communication was only 10 years old when Jenks published this book. Emerging from the man's back are two twisting arms, each ending in a hand. One leads to an apparatus used to read data stored on microfilm. The other hand leads to what looks like the incredible picture phone computer link. It's in the corner. It was developed actually by AT&T in the early 60s and first presented to the public at the New York World's Fair in '64. Interesting to know that this form of video communication was a commercial failure and discontinued after just a few years. The reason why I think this collage is so revealing to us is that it doesn't show any concrete architecture, except of the Pentagon building, of course. Instead, we see various man-machine interfaces, communication media, and devices for storing, processing and transferring data. All the media and equipment on display here demonstrates something else. It demonstrates the so-called technological condition of architecture. And I mean the fundamental issue of what the social, political, and technological background is against which architecture in the city is designed and produced. The hypothesis here, of course, is that the social and the political space is far too technical to be understood only in a social sense, just as the technical space is far too social and far too political to be understood only technically. Technical questions always imply social and political questions. The so-called technological condition includes concrete innovations and applications, as well as associated individual and social desires, fears, and hopes. So to ask about the technological condition, or let's say that kind of technological unrest, means to ask about the operative and narrative dimension, the scientific and the speculative dimension of architecture in the city in equal measures. So we are talking about something that we call social imagination of technology. Zheng's collage points to a hidden world of invisible infrastructure that permanently surround us, into which we inscribe ourselves, and at the same time in which we are already being inscribed. And we are often not aware of this. Infrastructures are the integration media of our society. They function like an invisible fabric of power, a kind of superstructure that seems to connect everything with everything. But while utopian designs and architecture of the 60s dreamed of organizing communication processes to create a so-called built anthropology, let's say in the sense of Dutch structuralist Aldo van Eyck, today it may be about the dream of social physics in the sense of Alex Pentland, director of MIT Media Lab. And after the major wave of cybernetics in the second half of the last century, we continue to witness how the once big and bulky computing machines are losing weight but gaining all the more in power. Sensors have emigrated to populate our environment, creating their own algorithmic ecosystems. And while smart dust blows like a warm technological wind through buildings, cities, and landscapes, our behavior, communication experiences, and emotions are being stored, analyzed, evaluated, and sold as quantifiable patterns. The random noise of data is all around us. Yet so far we can neither experience it nor grasp it directly. So this calls into questions long established cultural, political, and economic value and production systems, and that is, let's say, the focus of our summer school, Datatopia. So we have the 4 if questions. How will spaces of production and the concept of work change as certain physical and cognitive actions of humans are replaced by artificial intelligence systems or robotics? How will mobility and everyday life in cities change if the concept of urbanity is no longer a concept for a certain culture of the urban community, but in the sense of smart cities stands for an efficiently regulated, monitored, and synchronized matrix of life? What kind of spaces for health and body optimization might become necessary if aesthetic, ethical, and medical approaches to the human body lead to the increasing use of sensors to generate and diagnose biotechnological data? And finally, what kinds of spaces for education, teaching, and research might have to be created if design no longer focused on creativity and the sciences, no longer on hypotheses, on theories, but rather on a new kind of data empiricism in which traditional thinking in causalities were displaced by thinking in correlations? What will we remember in the future, and in what form, is contingent upon those who organize and control the media on which we store it, and what media we use to transport and pass on our individual and collective experience. But we seem to forget that data is not something given, but something created. Data is an epistemic construct produced under specific conditions, driven by political decisions, economic interests, cultural values, and social relations. We also seem to believe that everything produced by humans can be also explained. If this is indeed the case, then we need new methods and new narrative approaches. We need a new vocabulary and a new glossary that enable us not only to describe our data-driven society, but also reflect on it critically. Of course, there's more at stake than just storytelling. It's about the cultivating a new intellectual vigor and intellectual energy and a discursive originality. It's about the search for, let's say, civic possibilities to think and to design the complex fabric that we call the future. So at that point, I will not introduce each workshop leader again. I just want to say that the idea of future is crucial to all of the four workshops. So I want to thank An Ling, and I will do this. I'm sorry, I have to thank the team. I have to thank An Ling and his fantastic Arch Plus team, the team of projekt Bauhaus, especially Joanne, Katja, and Christian. And also I want to thank my team of the Chair for Architecture Theory at Cultural Institute of Technology, Bernita Legeret, Manuela Gantner, Lucas Bessay, Claudia Jodache, and Flo Bengert, who was a great help for organizing this event. A big thank goes to Mrs. Schaffer-Ziegenbalg of the Volkswagen Stiftung. Thank you for supporting this experimental summer school, and thanks for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here. And last but not least, I want to thank the workshop leaders and especially all the workshop participants. And I'm pretty much sure that we will have wonderful and intensive 4 days here at Floating Berlin. Thank you.